ask a couple questions and introduce the whole episode before we roll into it. But, you know, have you listened, first off, have you listened to any of our episodes before?
I haven't had a chance to, no.
That was the first test, Ashley.
Yep. All right. Interview over. So really, let me just give you a quick rundown of the format, kind of how we approach it, and then how we kind of envision our show with you kind of rolling through. I will introduce us as hosts. We'll roll into the first question from Joe, which is, who are you? What's your business? Give us just a quick 30 seconds on that little bio. And then we'll take 5 to 7 minutes. I'll ask you to go back on how you got into real estate specifically in the first place.
Okay.
And then we'll dive into where you're at now, which is, I mean, your entire business is focused on this topic of personality in real estate, right? Like introversion in real estate. And that I just want that. I think Joe and I both just want that to be the subject of today's show. And I think it's going to be fun coming from two full-blooded extroverts,
right?
Communicating with you. I think we're going to learn a lot. The total show runs about 35 minutes. And so once we kind of feel like we've exhausted the topic on introversion in real estate, and we'll roll into the last segment of the show, which we call 3, 2, 1 action. It's 3 quick questions that we ask every guest. All right. So I won't preview what those are.
They're not too challenging.
They're not too challenging. And that'll be it. That'll be a wrap.
All right,
any
good.
questions about that? Make sense?
Makes sense.
One quick question I have for you, Ashley, is where on the East Coast did you move from last year?
Boston.
Or a year ago? Oh, you're in Boston. Okay, right up in our neck of the woods. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I bring that up because I imagine, obviously being in LA, like you said, just before COVID happened, that's obviously had a substantial impact on the way that you go about your business. So we'll kind of explore that a little bit. And I agree with everything David said. I think this is such a unique episode to really highlight what it is that you do and that you're focused on, and how different it is than what we do. I think that this will be huge for our audience for sure.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. I mean, ever since meeting in, it was in Maine at KWYP event, I think, that we met. And, I've loved following your journey and everything. And it's great to see that you're having success and really making this your one thing. So,
yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, shall we roll into the show?
Let's rock and roll.
All right.
This is going to be good.
Awesome. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the All In Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, David Morse, CEO and team leader of Keller Williams Arizona Realty in Scottsdale and High Street, North Phoenix, with my co-host Joe Quattrucci, the director of growth for the Kristen Cole Network and owner of PC Expansion Worldwide. How's it going, man?
Going great.
All right, I'm excited for today's episode. Guys, this is going to be fun because if you know Joe and I, you know that we are 100% full-blooded extrovert, energized by people, get energized being in the room with people. And today, our special guest is Ashley Harwood, owner and founder of Move Over Extroverts, a friend of ours in real estate, and a self-described, I hope this is safe, a self-described introvert, for an awesome conversation on personality in real estate. Ashley, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Good.
Really great, Ashley. Thanks so much for being here with us today. Kind of give our listeners a high-level overview of who you are and exactly what is your business.
Sure. So I am a very proud introvert. My background is in real estate, and now I run this company that helps the introverts of the world, specifically introverts who are in real estate.
I love that. And we're going to get into introvert, extrovert, this whole conversation in a moment. But take us back a little bit, because I love that we share commonality in the real estate space. Talk to me a little bit about how you got into real estate in the first place and how that evolved into this business.
Sure. So I was a very strange child. I liked to watch the Little House channel. Before HGTV, there was a channel that just played MLS listings. like the
What?
picture of the newspaper, and it would cycle through. So I'd sit there and watch it.
I had no idea. Did you?
I had no idea. But
Maybe
now we know who was watching it.
So I've always been fascinated by real estate, and I did a quick couple-year stint in luxury retail. And then when the timing was right, I finally got my license and jumped all in, as you guys say, jumped in head first full-time into real estate in 2013.
So Ashley, had you already sort of identified yourself, or were you self-aware enough to know that you were an introvert when you came into real estate? And what was your thought process around that?
Not at all. That was part of the problem. I had no clue. And so I struggled way more than I needed to for the first couple of years because I didn't understand how my energy worked or, how to manage my time or any of that.
Crazy. So, okay, so you come into real estate 2013. You kind of, are struggling your way through, because I've got to imagine that people are teaching you lead gen and follow up and different strategies that just don't fit your personality. But I know that you became, successful. So talk to us about that. Like, what was the evolution, the progression, just real quick, in those 5 or 6 years?
Sure. So it started out exactly like you said. I got into training and I did everything I was taught to do, which consisted of spending my mornings in the office going through the Red X list and calling the expireds and calling the for sale by owners. And that totally drained me by about 12 o'clock. But then, because I was in this full time, I didn't have another job. So then I would go out in the afternoons and evenings and go to networking events and do even more, push myself even further. And eventually I started realizing that the business I was getting and the referrals I was getting, they were coming from my evening networking events. They were not coming from my mornings on the phone. So I was able to make some decisions about where to spend my time. But it took a long time to get there and to realize that.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you bring up the fact that you felt drained, and that totally makes sense. Your natural behavior may not be to communicate with all these people all the time, and so it makes sense that you would be really you'd feel mentally exhausted at the end of the day. But what I wanted to pick up on is the fact that you, even knowing your, what you liked and didn't like, you kind of had to, go way outside your comfort zone to even make those calls to the FSBOs and expireds, because presumably a coach like me was like, hey, you gotta call more people. You gotta talk to more people, right? And so talk to me a little bit about that for a second. The fact that you were able to get over the fear, go outside your comfort zone, even though you felt drained, you were still executing. And I think that's something I want our listeners to pick up on.
I was executing, yes. I was doing it because every time I went to a different training, they all told me kind of the same thing. And I saw the people in my office next to me doing these things and having success. And I became really frustrated and discouraged because I wasn't seeing the same results that they were, but I was seeing results in other places. So I think it was just a matter of realizing that. And then the other half of it was giving myself permission to let go of the pieces that weren't working for me and understand that not everyone's business is going to look the same.
Definitely. So before we get too deep, I don't want to take for granted that we're throwing around this word introvert versus extrovert. Can you, Ashley, define for our listeners, what is an introvert? What is an extrovert? Give us a little bit of an overview of how you would define those personality types.
I'm glad you asked, because it's a very misunderstood concept, and these terms are kind of thrown around a lot. A lot of times people think introverts are very quiet and shy and don't like people at all. And a lot of times that's just not true. I'm very outgoing. I do like people, and they drain me. So that's the difference. An introvert, by definition, is someone whose energy is replenished when they're alone. And an extrovert is someone who gets their energy from being around other people. So I think in 2020, we actually saw a lot of the extroverts struggling because they didn't have that outlet to get their energy battery recharged by other people.
Such an important distinction to make.
And I would definitely agree with that.
100%.
If I survey my sphere of influence, the people who are energized by the people, including myself, were the ones who, were maybe discouraged at best or depressed at worst. And I love the way that you use the word, drained, or, they replenish their energy. Quick story, quick example. My wife is an introvert, and I did not understand this concept whatsoever early in our marriage. And I was the evil person who actually said to her one night, I remember where we're standing, "You just don't care about people. You need to care for people more." Yeah. If you guys are watching the YouTube feed of this, you see Ashley's response to that. How we're still married, I have no idea. But that was a learning curve. And so, I think for our listeners, that's something that we have to understand. So if that is the difference between an introvert and an extrovert, how does an introvert become successful in real estate or any other business by honing in on those strengths? Because it is outside of our purview sometimes.
Right. There are a couple of things at play here. One of them is just being very aware of where your energy level is and which things drain it and which things replenish it. I always think of it like a phone battery. You have to plug yourself into the wall a little bit and be alone and take care to not overextend yourself. And a lot of times that comes into, your commitments and your time management and the things that you're saying yes to. You have to be really specific on, okay, which things are the highest and best use of not only my time, but my energy.
Ashley, would you mind expanding on what those things were for you personally, the things that filled you up and that you found success in versus the things that you knew specifically you did not want to do or enjoy doing or get re-energized by doing?
Yes, definitely. I really enjoyed being with people one-on-one. So what I found worked well for me was going to a large networking event, which was draining, and meeting some people and then picking out the ones who I felt a connection with and following up with them and building those relationships one-on-one, which took a lot longer than just, pounding the phones all day. But in the end, it worked really well because then I had a steady stream of referrals and a good business that I really enjoyed building. But even those one-on-one meetings, as much as I love them, I could only do about 2 in one day. There were days I tried to squeeze in 4, and by that 4th meeting, I was not a very pleasant person to be around.
Right, because you're exhausted, you're drained, you're putting in maximum effort and willpower to remain professional and focused, and by the end of it, you're like, holy smokes, I need a break.
Right. So it was a process of learning my own boundaries and how much I could fit into one day, essentially. And then
Ashley, do you find that introverts connect with other introverts more often, or did you find that to be successful, you were getting a lot of connection with those people who maybe had a complementary or different personality, a lending partner who was the extrovert, or, does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yes. I think there are a lot of people who are secretly introverts and they just don't realize it. So it's kind of hard to answer your question for that reason. Actually, when I started this business, Move Over Extroverts, and I told people what I was doing, they were like, "What are you talking about? You're not an introvert. What are you doing?" Because they didn't realize you can't always tell.
Thank you for telling me what I am and what I'm not.
Right. So Ashley, so kind of with that in mind, knowing that we may not even realize what we are truly, is there like a particular personality test, or is it just a matter of awareness? How do you recommend somebody identify whether or not they're truly more introverted or extroverted? And where's the middle ground? I mean, where are the people is there a middle ground?
There is a middle ground. It's called an ambivert. And there are some good quizzes.
I just learned a new word.
Yeah. Ambivert?
Like ambivert, which means both, like ambidextrous.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. You're so much smarter than us.
I know. I've just studied this stuff a lot. Definitely would recommend the book Quiet by Susan Cain. That's the book that helped me realize I'm an introvert. And I do have to take a minute and tell you this story because it's crazy how I came to even read this book. I was stressing myself out so much and had so much anxiety because I wasn't taking care of my energy that I actually went and saw a therapist, and she recommended this book to me. And so then I read the book and I was like, holy crap, this explains my entire life. I need to make some changes.
And I imagine, I can speak from personal experience. Sometimes reading those books and getting that knowledge, it's sometimes just a relief to be like, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Like there's other people that can relate to this. And that means together we can seek out some solutions. And so that leads me to my next question. What are some of the vices that you had to identify and install in your life to kind of balance or counterbalance when you were getting further outside your comfort zone? Did you have any particular vices?
That's a good question. There's nothing specific that comes to mind. I can tell you it felt very uncomfortable to stop doing some of these things, to cancel my RedX subscription and say, I'm going to draw this line in the sand for myself and not do this thing anymore. It felt really uncomfortable. And there were days I felt like I was a complete failure. And then I had to just start talking to myself again and say that it's okay. You're doing other things. You're replacing it with other things that are working. But
so that's very interesting, because as someone who runs a brokerage and someone who coaches, hundreds of agents, I bet we implicitly put that pressure. Like, was that fear just all generated in your mind, or were those people around you creating kind of a guilt and shame around that? And if the latter was the case, like, how can we protect against that and take care of our introverted agents who still want to crush it?
Yeah, it was a lot of outside influence without them realizing it. Like, everyone's intentions are good, and the classes I attended and the people who were my mentors, they all meant well. There was just not a lot of other options. It was kind of like, this is the model, this is what works, this is what worked for me. If it's not working for you, just do more of it. Instead of, if it's not working for you, let's find something that will work for you, and you can build a system around it and do it, regularly, and then it will work. So I think as trainers and brokers and coaches, the best thing you can do for all your agents is just encourage them to try lots of different strategies for lead gen, and encourage them to stick with the ones that they actually enjoy, at least some of the time.
Yeah, and Ashley, I want to stay on this topic for just a second, because I, as a real estate coach, definitely fall into this, where I'm looking back and reflecting and saying, a vast majority of my advice is kind of designed for those extroverted, more socially high I personality types. What advice do you give to me as a real estate coach as options and solutions to help the more introverted agents that I'm working with? What are a few other examples that people that identify as being introverted may consider doing as their lead generation?
There's a whole list of things. I actually have a PDF with like 80 different lead gen alternatives.
Nice.
But it's what I do with my clients is I take them through a process of kind of backing into a strategy. So we talk about, what are you already doing in your life? Where are you meeting people? Are you in organizations? Are you in clubs? Do you go to church? Like, start there and then build it out and be strategic and build relationships. There are 1.5 million things that can be turned into lead gen. Just a matter of finding the ones that will work.
Well, and your strategy there makes perfect sense to me, because rather than adding something additional to the calendar, some additional energy suck, you're integrating it into the already existing energy sucks or energy givers. Because I've got to imagine some of these lead gen things still could suck the energy of an introvert. But I think what you've said is just like you're managing it. You're understanding how to manage that. Is that a fair, summary 100%.
Of what? Okay. Basically, for introverts, any interaction with other people is going to be somewhat draining. And that's not, it's just something to be aware of. And so you have to really, how am I going to spend this energy in the most efficient way possible?
So talk to us a little bit about Move Over Extroverts. Tell us what the original concept was of this business, and specifically what it is that you're offering. What's your service here?
It's changed a lot since I first came up with the concept in 2018. What it looks like right now is I run a membership group for introverts, for any business owner, including realtors. And then I also work one-on-one with people. And what we do in our one-on-one work, it's not your traditional coaching. It's really centered on, let's figure out this lead gen piece and find something that works. And so it's very targeted and very specific. And so we spend, the first session could be 3-4 hours, and then we have some follow-ups and make sure that it's getting implemented correctly.
Now, I don't know if this is a silly question, but how do you personally feel about the use of scripts? And is that something that's going to help or hinder somebody who's extroverted or introverted rather?
I think scripts can be great if they are done in a natural way. So I actually gave a script to one of my clients this morning before our call today, and he loved it. He wrote it right down. But I think they have to be either created naturally from the individual, or, you can look at a list of scripts and pick out the ones that feel more natural and tweak them a little bit. But I think scripts are important because otherwise it's easy to get flustered, especially when you're sitting at the table with the seller and, you're nervous, especially if you're newer in the business. It's
Sure.
good to have some things that are just kind of ingrained in your vocabulary.
Definitely. I want to kind of take it from just the subject of introversion to asking a specific question to someone who may be an introvert but is running a team. And I think so often that team lead, that rainmaker, whatever you call it in your vernacular, is looked at as being the social rah-rah cheerleader type of person. What if I'm a leader and I'm an introvert? How do I lead my team well?
So I think that introverts have an advantage here in leadership in that in place of the really high energy, rah-rah, we have this sense of just genuineness and caring and making sure that things are done properly. And this is, obviously a very general statement here. And that's not to say extroverts don't do those things. But I think for introverts, one of the strengths is really going deeper with people and having a calming presence. Like that can be an important part of leadership, is making sure the people on your team feel safe and calm and supported rather than just jazzed up all the time. Maybe hire somebody else to do the jazzing up for the team.
Interesting. I love how you clarify. You made sure to say it's not just. That was a general statement, and I would agree that I think just knowing myself and watching other leaders, that sometimes that constant being on one plane of energy allows us to really sometimes just miss the emotional energy in the room. And I know I have to constantly be checking myself on, what are those dynamics in the room, because my tendency can be just to speed through and miss those signs and miss those cues. And so I think what you're saying there, Ashley, is really important for the extrovert leaders. And I think your suggestion there to make sure there's someone in your world who can pick up on those things is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, Ashley, is there any potential harm in using these labels? Is there anybody listening right now that's saying, I'm an introvert, and so therefore I'm limiting my behavior, I'm limiting what I'm willing to do mentally because I've given myself a label? And that applies to the other side too, just as well. Am I limiting myself if I identify as an extrovert? What are your thoughts on the language that we use with ourselves?
I think there is definitely the potential for this to be used as an excuse, and that's not the intention. The intention is to use it as something that's very empowering and to bring more self-awareness. What I always suggest, especially for new agents who are trying to figure out what works for them, is you kind of have to just try a lot of things and be open-minded and put in some effort and then be okay saying, okay, this isn't working, but this is.
How long do you generally coach your clients to utilize those methods? Do you deviate at all from like the traditional real estate advice to try something for 90 days straight, recognizing that your client's energy may be sucked or zapped?
It completely depends on what the thing is. Obviously, farming is going to take a lot longer than the other things, and it depends on the client too. So that's why I'm really excited about doing one-on-one work. I didn't do that for the first couple of years in this business. I was focused on group coaching and teaching classes and other things. But I love working one-on-one with people because we get to really create something that works for them as a specific individual. And it's not me telling them, here are the things you need to do. It's us collaborating and figuring out what's going to work for them. So it entirely depends. And their feedback is so critical to how I coach them as well. Because if they're telling me that they're just feeling terrible all the time, then something needs to change.
I'd love to ask you about this concept of mirroring and matching. And it's one of the kind of fundamental concepts we teach in real estate coaching. And me being a super, highly energetic person, if I'm in front of somebody that's a little bit lower energy, the idea is that I'm going to mirror and match their energy, their body language, tone, volume, speed, all of these different things so I can be more relatable to them. How important is mirroring and matching as it pertains to introverts and extroverts? And for the record, this is me right now attempting my best to match. This is my lowest energy that I go to. It's actually been a little bit of a struggle. I'm usually much higher. So I'm attempting to do it right now. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I feel like I just sucked you in.
Joe just got really vulnerable there.
No, I think it's an important concept in theory. My recommendation, though, for people is to not try to force it too much. It's one thing if you're with a potential client, then you want to try to mirror and match a little bit more. But if you're just with people at a networking event or your colleagues or whatever, just be yourself. It's fine. You're going to connect with people who are similar to you, and that's natural. And there's enough even with clients, there's enough real estate business out there for everyone. And someone who's looking for, I had to tell this to myself all the time, someone who's looking for that super high energy, super high I personality type, they're probably not going to be a good client for me, and I'm not going to be the right agent for them. And I'm okay with that. I'd much rather work with the clients who are a little bit more similar to me, and that way we understand each other better. We can communicate better.
And I think this must be really empowering to people, because I hear a lot of abundance in what you're saying, a lot of just recognize and be aware of who you are and be okay with that, and just a lot of affirmation in there's enough business for the people that, run around like crazy like me, or talk super fast like Joe, or carry themselves with a different demeanor. And I don't know, to me, I'm reassured just hearing those things. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley, you almost reminded me of like the Simon Sinek concept of the purpose of business is not to be in business with everybody. It's to be in business with people that believe in what you believe and that you're going to relate with. And if we were to, go so drastic as to say we divide the population in half between introverts and extroverts, I'm not trying to appeal to everybody. I'm trying to appeal to the people that are going to work with me and that are going to enjoy working with me and that I'm going to enjoy working with, just like you said. So I think that's an important concept for everybody here.
And I think if you carry the mirroring and matching thing too far, I guess there probably is a tendency then to create, probably not even meaning to, an inauthenticity.
Yeah.
Right? Or like a disingenuous. I mean, would you agree with that, Ashley?
100%. And people can tell that comes across, and then you probably won't even get a referral from that person because they're going to be like, this is this easy used car salesman agent, and no one likes that.
Definitely. So what do you find being, what do your clients tell you is the, single most helpful piece of advice or research or resource that you bring to them?
I think one of the most valuable things I bring to people is really this concept of treating energy like a resource, thinking about it and honoring it the same way that we do money and time, and being, specific about where it's spent and how it's regained, because it is finite in any given moment.
So if I'm someone who feels like my batteries are constantly drained, what, obviously knowing yourself feeds into this, but what do you find to be some of the ways that, your clients are getting recharged and rejuvenated in really healthy ways?
So 2 things come to mind. First is making sure they're taking enough time off. I always recommend at least 1 full day off every week. And I know for some people listening, that might sound crazy, but out in the rest of the world, people take 2 days off every week. Next to each other. They call it,
and that's America. If we go outside the scope of America, people take... Yeah, I'm going to get myself in trouble. Never mind. All our international listeners just hung up the...
So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is looking at what my clients are doing every day in their activities and finding those things that are wasteful energy sucks, like the things that are really draining and not producing any results. Like, we got to get rid of that stuff.
Gotcha. So if I hear what you're saying, it's almost like find those things, get rid of them, find the things that may be draining but that are leading to the results, and maybe deal with them or manage them long enough to start getting the ball rolling, and then kind of slowly transition as you figure yourself out in your activities into more and more activities that are truly going to be more pleasurable for you to execute and still getting the same result.
Right, exactly. And there will always be activities that are draining, but if they're making money, then they're worth it.
I guess as you guys were just conversing there, I go back to your analogy with the phone. And when if you're an iPhone user, you hold down and all the apps open up, and you kind of scroll through, and you can kind of flick up and close out those apps that might be running in the background, just taking up energy. While simultaneously, there's some apps that I want to leave running because there's a specific purpose. And I don't know. Is that a good analogy?
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Awesome. So, what else? I just feel like there's so much in this topic that we could dive into.
I mean, I guess personally, I'm still wondering in my head how I need to adapt my behavior as a coach, a leader, a mentor to other people in business and in real estate, and how my personal approach can be adapted to not make people feel like they're being isolated or alienated, or like that I'm not giving them plausible options and realistic opportunities that they're going to want to actually execute on. So I guess first off, how do I identify those people? Is it as simple as asking? And then, how do I just make sure that I'm being all inclusive in my approach, whether it's a real estate coach, a team leader, or any other business owner for that matter?
That's a good question. I mean, when things are open again, I'll come out there and teach a class for you.
That would be helpful.
That would be helpful.
Well, I guess not to answer the question that I asked you, but let's give it a shot.
But as an extrovert, I'm gonna.
But it's almost like, I mean, in my head, as I was asking the question, I'm thinking the answer is you've got to just know your people. You've got to know who's across the table from you, whether they're part of your team or a client you're working with. You've just got to have the awareness and take the time to ask the questions and to explore with them and look for the indicators that would help me identify what is going to be a better solution for this person.
Yeah, absolutely. And having a very honest conversation where they feel safe and they don't feel like you're going to judge them for saying, hey, this one thing might not be working for me.
Mm-hmm. I think it's similar to if you're fortunate enough to have a team to make, I mean, you've used the word safe a couple times, and we learn in 7 levels of communication and fierce conversations, these different communication, systems or structures, if you will, that vulnerability is, the pinnacle of communication. And if you're fortunate enough to have a team, it's making sure your people know that they can come and point things out, right? So my director of operations, our CFO, is completely opposite. She is an introvert. She is drained. Her battery's drained from people, and she's sometimes the best person who comes to me and is like, Dave, you were a real jerk right there, or you need to do this, and she has permission to do that. Now, you don't give that permission to everyone in your organization, I don't believe, but there's certain key people that I think need to have permission when they have complementary personalities and skill sets to be able to speak those things into you to make the organization better. So Ashley, what is, looking ahead into 2021, obviously we just came off COVID. What do you think is one of the biggest opportunities for introverts in the real estate market specifically right now? Like, how can they move their business in the right direction given the current climate that we're in?
I think it's important for them to tap into the people who already know them and like them and want to work with them, and ask for their help and ask for referrals. I think that's the biggest opportunity. And then there's also the opportunity to differentiate yourself somehow, because if you're not going to be the loudest, most out there person in the real estate world, it's important to find something else that's a little bit different and that makes you memorable and stick out in people's minds. So whatever that looks like. I have somebody right now who we're working with, and he's branding himself as sort of the more private. Privacy is very important. Like, he's not going to put everything all over Facebook about his clients. And so we're developing different kind of niches that may not have existed before.
That's a great strategy, I feel like.
That makes a lot of sense, and it goes right back to something you said very early on in the conversation, which is, let's take a look at what you're already doing. Are you somebody that goes to church regularly? Do you regularly play softball? What are the activities that you're already doing, and what is the niche target audience of people that you can relate to naturally and organically through your normal life as it is today? And it's just a matter of strategizing, how do we turn that into a real estate business or whatever business we're talking to.
And I do think that could be a real advantage, Ashley, that an introvert has, because, again, grossly generalizing, but an introvert may have the tendency to go deeper and not wider in their relationships, right? And so for the extrovert, it may be easier to go out and be on a public platform and to just spread everything really wide, but to make that call to their database and ask for a referral could be a real challenge, and that could be a real fear that maybe the introvert can deal with or handles differently. And so that I think that is advantageous. I think that's very insightful. So, Ashley, are you ready to transition into the last segment of our show?
The firing squad of questions. Yeah.
Firing squad.
Maybe we'll rename it. 3, 2, 1, action. It's the same 3 questions we fire at our guest. Casey, clean that up. Our guest every single episode. So let's start with question number 1.
Ashley, who is the one person who has had the most impactful impression on your business, and why?
Have to be one of my former business coaches, Peter Pacetto. He helped me develop Move Over Extroverts and encouraged me to launch something completely different that had never been done before, and encouraged me that I could actually do it and that people wanted it.
That's awesome. So question number 2, what has been the most impactful book on your business and why?
I think I already mentioned it. It was Quiet. That is, everyone should read that book. Especially if you're married to an introvert, that's a good book to read.
That was completely directed at me.
Not pointing anybody out.
Thank you, Ashley. Awesome.
And the third question, Ashley, is, this is, of course, the All In Podcast, where we encourage and we challenge our listeners to take the information that they heard here today and go take an immediate step in the right direction. So what advice do you have? What's something that our listeners can go take action on right now today to either determine whether or not they're an introvert or an extrovert, or to start making positive changes in their business once they've identified that?
Mm.
And I modified the question there. I made it a little bit longer than normal because I want to make sure that we're giving an all-inclusive answer.
Thank you. So this is something that both introverts and extroverts alike can do. Grab a piece of paper, write down everything that you're doing right now for lead gen, and then put like a score, 1 to 10, and do 2 sets of scores. Do the first scoring, how effective it is, how much business you're getting from it. And then the second set is how much you enjoy it / how draining it is. Like, just go through, make a list, analyze everything. And then if there's anything that is super draining and super annoying, like for the extroverts, if you're just doing something that you absolutely hate and dread it and it's not producing any results, cross it off the list. And then take the things that are the opposite and spend more time on those things. Does that make sense?
Practical, tactical, and actionable advice. I love it.
And isn't it amazing how some of the biggest improvements, advancements in our lives and in our business come not from adding, but from subtracting? Right? Like you said, it doesn't matter if you're an introvert, extrovert. I think often we think about moving the needle forward being, I've got to add, I got to 10x something. And sometimes it's actually dialing it back and getting more focused. That's a great answer. Ashley, we've really enjoyed this conversation. Where can our listeners find more of your content, more information, and connect with you?
Sure. So they can go to my website, moveoverextroverts.com. The best place to find me. And there are a couple different things on there, including a form you can fill out if you want to schedule a call.
I love it. Well, we'll link that up in the show notes. Thank you so much for spending time with us. And guys, we hope that this episode has been informative and helpful for you. As always, go play all in.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the All In Podcast. We want to invite you to find all of today's resources from our show page at aipodcast.co. We also ask that you take just 1 minute to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. This is how we grow and how we're able to bring you the best content each and every week. Now go play all in.